Hey there, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to show you how using some glazing, some highlighting, some blending, some non-metallic metal, and even weathering it, we can get this cool looking Deadpool style Vindicare model painted up. This is the second part of this series, and don't forget to check out the first part if you're interested in how to paint the stone. For now though, let's get to it. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is get some Kador Red base and Thamar Black, mix those two together and paint it all over the Mini. You're going to need probably 2 coats or so of this. Keep it nice and thin, that way you won't get any paint lines and brush strokes showing on the Mini when it's done. Then I'm going to explain how to use some volumetric highlighting, which is a posh artsy term for paint it so that the shapes become more embellished in a way you may not have had before. Most of us at some point in our life, whether it's been at school or wherever, have had to draw a flat 2D shape, and then using a combination of just like shading or painting or whatever, had to make it look 3D. And volumetric highlighting is basically us doing this on a model that's already 3D to further enhance that look to it. Essentially what we're doing is painting by numbers, and all we need to do is make certain parts of the model look brighter. If we take the example I've got with the pencil in the bottom corner, instead of me showing you how to shade in parts of it, think about you painting every single part of the model in that way. So for instance here we're adding in the next round of shading. This is you doing in the next round of highlighting. So rather than leaving the bright point, you're painting the bright point as well, and at the final bright point of the sphere you end up just with your final highlights. Of course we're going to be using some recessed shading, and that helps us create the shadows, which helps to create the 3D look. Hopefully this has made sense to you, but if it hasn't, please leave a comment letting me know what you want explained a bit more. Maybe you might want to jump into the stream where you can ask the questions and I can answer these for you in real time as well. But hopefully it's all nice and clear. Okay, so hopefully your mind isn't too blown by the knowledge that you can use a paintbrush essentially the same way you've used any kind of writing tool and colouring tool for the entirety of your life. What we're doing here is essentially the shading part of all of that, which we've taken some piggy purple ink and we just brought that into the recesses a little bit to shade it nice and softly. Then we're taking some of our yellow, Flash Kits yellow, mixing that in with some Kador Red base in about a 5:1-ish ratio. Essentially you only want to have a little bit of an orange tint to your red, otherwise it gets a little too far too fast. And we're putting on some highlights. Stick to the brightest, highest creases and things like that here, maybe a little bit around some of the edges. When we get to doing the back in a second, you'll see that we basically just sort of follow the musculature around there. You want to make sure that the line that's the darker line in between your highlights isn't too thick. If you think about some of the models that you've seen that have been very old paint jobs, for instance by GW, Katachans, I'm looking at you, you'll notice the skin looks off, and that's because there's very wide dark layers in between skin tones. Keep those nice and thin and everything will look a little bit more natural like it's meant to. Then add in a little bit more of that Flash Kits yellow and just pop on a few little specular highlights here and there. You're just looking to pop out those final bright peaks of stuff and really draw a little bit more attention to those areas. It also helps to give a little bit more contrast as well, making your entire paint job a little bit more interesting. So we're kicking off all of the black parts with just a nice layer of black. We've just spent ages highlighting our red and making sure all of our volumes are down properly and everything else. Now it's time to tidy everything up and we can start moving forward. So just a nice thin coat of Thamar Black everywhere we want it. Now, because we're painting this Deadpool from a specific image, we're going to make sure that we've got the right sort of designs on his suit. So here we had a little kind of shoulder cap, upper arm kind of thing going on, so we'll paint that nicely and neatly in black as well. Again, keep your paint nice and thin, do a couple of coats if you need to. And then there was this kind of like weird square blocky design that went down in a couple of stripes, so again we're just taking our time and blocking that out. As long as your paint's reasonably thin, you're able to go back and just correct any mistakes by glazing in some red if you have to. For our brown, we need some Steel Legion drab, and later on, though we don't show this in the video, we highlight that with some Bogrim brown, which is a nice kind of ochre colour to keep it nice and warm. We've got the belt, we've got the knife, scabbard, and a few other little bits like pouches to do with that. Then for our black-blue mix, which is how we want to do all of the freehand elements of Deadpool to separate them nicely from the armour with a colour and temperature contrast, we're adding in some Meridius Blue. Meridius Blue is a very nice blue teal colour from P3, and we keep working that in. And in the same way we did our volumetric colours on the red, we're working that up towards the brightest areas of the miniature. We're helping to create those volumes and making sure something looks more 3D. We're embellishing the effect that we've got on the mini. With every coat of paint that goes on, just like we did with our red, we're keeping it ever so slightly smaller so it fits within the confines of our previous coat. And if at any point you find that you've put something on there, you think, you know what, I think I've maybe done a little bit too much of that, just go back to the previous coat and then paint that out. So basically you're painting with a subtractive method by taking away some of the paint you've just put on the model, covering it up with paint that belong on the previous aspect of our highlighting. Alright, so we've done our blue black, now it's time to work on the neutral black. And because we ended up with 3 lots of colours that all, well technically 4 with the base thing he stood on, like we want to make sure that everything's got its own unique personality. So for this one we're staying very neutral, and by that all I mean is you could essentially just use black and white and get all of these colours in without a problem. Unlike the blue or the green tints that we've got on things like the rifle and of course the Deadpool-esque markings that he's got on his suit, we want to keep this within that paint. The same technique that we used here was used in last week's video where we did the chain wrapped around the bit of statue. Essentially start quite dark, work up quite bright, and then if you need to come back in later on a little bit of darkness and add in a few more shadows. Painting can always be a back and forth thing. It doesn't have to be one and done. Always go back and amend things, tint things and so on. Break out of that pattern. Now, apologies for this part of the video, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, my camera didn't record the first couple of coats of paint that we did here, but essentially we're doing exactly the same thing we've done on the blue and on the neutral black. We've started using some Eldritch, which is a nice bright teal colour from P3, mixed that in with the black, and then started working that up into our highlights until we got to a point where we were nice and bright with it. For this particular set of highlights, I want to go a little bit brighter to fully enhance that contrast, so I ended up adding in some Sickly Skin, which is a very nice pale, not quite white, ever so slightly blue-green kind of colour. Once we've got all of this down, we wanted to increase the shadows again, and thereby creating more contrast and separation. So we took some Thamar Black, thinned that down to a glaze, and kept working on everything we've got there to keep everything nice and smooth. Doing stuff like this is also a good way to help smooth out any of the glazes and blends that you've put on a miniature. Sometimes you'll find if you haven't quite mixed things right, you've got a kind of a cell shaded look to things. Adding in a little bit of a darker colour can really help to unify everything and bring it all back nicely without having any issues. Then we just took a little bit more Thamar Black, thinned that down to a wash consistency, and made sure we hit all of the recesses on the gun as well. Now we've got something that looks quite smooth and is all very nicely put together. For the eye lens, we did basically the same set of techniques that we used for the shoulder pads and stuff, but we just went a little bit further with our highlights. So again, we added some Sickly Skin in for the final layers and worked those up. For the non-metallic metal elements of this model, such as the Imperial Eagle and the silencer at the other end of the barrel, basically followed the same tutorial we did last week with the chain. So again, you can refer to that video for some of the guides on how to do that. It's kind of the same thing we've done on the black here, to be honest, but just taken a little bit further. There's not a lot of secrets really in painting, it's just use the right colour in the right spot and you're kind of done. Who knew? Non-metallic metal time. So for this you can be very kind of quick moving with your brush strokes. You don't need to be too careful as long as your paint is nice and thin. This is one of the best things about glazing, is you can keep everything nice and thin, and that gives you a little bit more freedom in case things go wrong. Essentially we've kept this with just black and Eshin grey. Notice how we've used a lot of these colours so far in this video, and we're just building up nice quick passes of this in the brighter areas of the model. So again, we're going back to that kind of here's our sphere and here's how we shade and stuff kind of example from earlier on. We're adding that to the mini in a place where, as you can see, it becomes a little bit brighter around the upper part of that back panel. And you saw just then how it dries and it becomes a little bit more matte and a little bit more smooth than when you're applying it. So give things in between layers just long enough to get to that point where it's cured. Add some edge highlights and then add in some some Mechanicus grey for some more edge highlights. We'll be adding Administratum grey in a minute, so don't worry, you will need that. And with the edge highlights, it helps to just bring everything together. To help break up things like our blends though, if they haven't been particularly clear, we can use some stippling. And here we're just stippling on a little bit of that same mix. So thin down your paint a little bit more. There's a great guide on how you use some stippling effects in, again, that previous video where we used it on the stonework. So maybe go back and check that out if you're struggling here. Essentially, light brush pressure with an older brush. You can see this one's very splayed out. That's totally fine. And it leaves a nice look of texture on the model without adding any real texture. And then, now with some administrator engraving, we start getting on some actual highlights and a few little bits of battle damage. So here, those little strikes that we've put on the model, again, help to make sure that any parts of our blend that aren't super smooth suddenly don't jump out at you so much because we've broken up the surface a little bit. Both stippling and battle damage, any kind of weathering techniques, are a great way to hide any imperfections in what you've done, which means that anybody out there watching this video should be trying how to glaze. It's one of those things that once you learn, it unlocks a lot more doors for you than anything else, so definitely give it a go. And a couple of little dots and a couple of little strikes, we've added enough battle damage to this to start moving into the next step, and that is going to be to make it look a lot more 3D. As before, when we're working on the rifle, we're going back to a nice thin, almost wash-like Thamar black, and here we're just going to get into underneath all of the rivets, into any of the recesses between parts of the model, and then also, when we come near any part of battle damage, we're going to put a little black line above it. So if we've got a slash in the model, let's put a black line directly above that. We've got those little dots, we'll put a black dot just above that. That gives the illusion of there being a recess above our highlight, and the light is just catching the edge, that little highlight we've got, underneath it. It makes everything look 3D without you having to start hacking up your model and stuff like that. So this is a nice little trick to use. Now finally, to add some weathering to this, we're taking some Trolls Layer Orange and pushing it right past a glaze. We talked about this a lot last week using the green, now using orange to apply a rust-like effect. Here we're just putting it on a little bit at a time, and you can't really overload a model with this, but obviously don't go crazy. We're putting it in any of the spots that would naturally occur some rust. So anything that's got an underside, like the lettering on here and so on. And then once we've got all of this down and we're happy with how it's looking, we'll even stipple some on here and there as well, just to make sure we've got something that helps get the whole thing a very weathered, old, battered kind of effect. Now I think this gives the entire model a very unified look, but you can be the judge of that. There's one thing left to do though. We had a little unicorn that we put on the statue's head. Time to add some more Deadpool graffiti. Here we've got a little love heart with Deadpool for Wolverine, because why not? It's fun to add little cool touches like this. Now if you've enjoyed the video, please by all means give it a thumbs up, and if there's any part of the video that you felt has helped you out, then please hit that subscribe button and maybe even ring the bell button to get some more content another time. If you've really enjoyed it, leave a comment explaining what you liked. It helps with engagement and helps more people see this video. So if you've been helped, you could help out somebody else as well. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you in the streams. Peace out, everyone.